We'll be in Psalm 42 this morning. Before we begin reading, we are beginning the Exodus section of the book of Psalms. This section stretches from Psalms 42 to 72. The primary focus is going to be the ruin and redemption with Israel in view, and it's directed, what we see toward the nation of Israel, but we can see that this is going to be a future view of Israel, and I think that when we read this, we'll see there's a lot of application that we can take to our lives, and that even though Israel is in focus, we can still take lesson and notes from this. So the first the first division of this of the Exodus section is going to be Psalms 42 through 49. It contains psalms that were not written by David, but were instead actually written by the sons of Korah, and that is the same Korah that is discussed in the book of Numbers that attempted an overthrow or a rebellion or a revolution against Moses and Aaron and wanted to take charge in the wilderness. Korah and many of the rebels did fall. We won't go and read that whole story this morning from the book of Numbers, but we know that the earth had opened up and swallowed them up. But the sons of Korah persisted, and so those descendants actually ended up writing this series of psalms here. Then we have Psalms 50 through 60. Those are regarding Israel's Redeemer. Out of 50 through 60, we have another, you can further divide those. 51 stands alone. 52 and 55 are a mashil, or instruction. 56 through 60 are a miktam, or they are engraven permanent psalms. Then we move on to 61 to 72, which are about Israel's redemption. So, again, this is ruin and redemption, so we'll be starting with ruin, and we'll start reading here in Psalm 42. One more thing to note, the Genesis section, 1 through 41, is sometimes or is often ascribed as the Jehovah section, and then the Exodus section is sometimes known as the Elohim section. And so those are two different names of God. Jehovah, in the first section, that name appears 270 times roughly, and Elohim appears only 15 times. Whereas in the Exodus section, Elohim appears 164 times, and Jehovah appears 30 times. So there's been a big shift, and not only that, but again, we discussed that David also wrote only about 17 of the Psalms from this section, whereas he wrote the vast majority of the Psalms in the first section. So, Psalm 42, beginning in verse 1. As the hart panteth after the water brook, so panteth my soul after thee, O God. My soul thirsteth for God, for the living God. When shall I come and appear before God? My tears have been my meat day and night, while they continually say unto me, Where is thy God? When I remember these things, I pour out my soul in me, for I had gone with the multitude. I went with them to the house of God with the voice of joy and praise, with a multitude that kept holy day. Why art thou cast down, O my soul? And why art thou disquieted in me? Hope thou in God, for I shall yet praise him for the help of his countenance. O my God, my soul is cast down within me. Therefore will I remember thee from the land of Jordan, and of the Hermonites, and from the hill Mizar. Deep calleth unto deep at the noise of thy waterspouts. All thy waves and thy billows are gone over me. Yet the Lord will command his loving kindness in the daytime, and in the night his song shall be with me, and my prayer unto the God of my life. I will say unto God my rock, Why hast thou forgotten me? Why go I mourning because of the oppression of the enemy? As with a sword in my bones mine enemies reproach me, while they say daily unto me, Where is thy God? Why art thou cast down, O my soul? And why art thou disquieted within me? Hope thou in God, for I shall yet praise him, who is the health of my countenance and my God. And so again, I mentioned that these were written by the sons of Korah, and you may see either as part of verse 1 or as a header before the beginning of verse 1, it would say, to the chief musician, Mashil, for the sons of Korah. And we mentioned that word Mashil earlier when talking about some of these divisions, and the word Mashil means instruction. And so, again, we see here that the sons of Korah, they were set apart from the rest of the nation, and they were called out specifically because of the rebellion, because of the attempted revolution. And so to be a son of Korah is not something that makes you extremely popular throughout the rest of the nation, because they're known as the sons of the rebel Korah. But they do end up writing this section of Psalms here, and they are quite poignant and serious here. So, back to verse 1. As the hart panteth after the water brooks, so panteth my soul after thee, O God. And so there's a very clear difference here between the people who wrote this psalm and Korah and his original sons from back in the book of Numbers. There's a very clear distinction. The authors, the writers of this psalm, they are seeking after God. It says, so panteth my soul after thee, O God. My soul thirsteth for God, for the living God. When shall I come and appear before God? The focus is completely different. Instead of the focus being on wishing for power and wishing to be in a position of strength and leadership, the focus here is on God. It's on following after him, chasing after him. It's on going in his direction. Verse 3 says, my tears have been my meat day and night, while they continually say unto me, where is thy God? And remember, we said that this first collection here is about Israel in ruin. And so this is going to be about the remnant here in the future, the remnant that seeks after God, but they have very little. My tears have been my meat. I've got an example that's more common to me. Whenever you get outside and it's hot out and you might be working and under the sun and sweating just profusely. There are times whenever the sweat will run down your face and you can't do anything about it. It's going to run into your mouth, it's going to run into your eyes, it's going to get everywhere. And what does it taste like? You taste it. It's salty. And so tears and sweat have extremely similar composition, and they are also salty. And so if you've ever sweated and tasted your tears or your sweat, it's the same thing here, except this is, again, tears have a different source and they have a different purpose. And so it's a very almost depressing kind of thing to hear, my tears have been my meat. That's where you're getting, you're not even getting actual sustenance, It's saying, well, this is all that's sustaining me, and it's not sustaining you at all. You can't be sustained on salt water alone. In fact, there are many people who have met their end because they had an abundance of water available to them. All kinds of it, more than they could ever drink, but it was salt water. To be trapped on the ocean is a death sentence. You will not make it. And unless you've got something that can collect rainwater, and it's raining very often, and even then, probably not going to make it because you can only survive on water for so long. And so this psalm here just shows us a picture of a people that are not even sustaining. And then the tears are also a reminder, because it says, while they continually say unto me, where is thy God? You don't have anything, and you also feel like you're abandoned here. And that's what it feels like to this group. It says in verse 4, when I remember these things, I pour out my soul in me, for I had gone with the multitude. I went with them to the house of God, with the voice of joy and praise, with a multitude that kept holy day. And has a remembrance, that in a state now of just destitution and feeling forsaken, and remembering a better time, remembering a time of joy, remembering a time of plenty, remembering a time of going to the house of God. But that's not available now. It's not an option now in this case. Why art thou cast down, O my soul, and why art thou disquieted in me? Hope thou in God, for I shall yet praise him for the help of his countenance. And that's something to remember, that even whenever we are at our lowest, even whenever it feels that God may not be there, he is. And that's something that's extremely important, because the sons of Korah here, and then you can take this and apply this to the remnant of Israel, asking themselves, why art thou cast down, O my soul? And why art thou disquieted in me? Just taking and just stepping out for a second and looking from the outside in. Hope thou in God, for I shall yet praise him for the help of his countenance. And there's many times where we as Christians, we may feel down, or we may feel heartbroken, or we may even feel abandoned or alone. And we have to know that regardless of what it feels like inside, that the truth is that God is still there. The truth is that God is still present. The truth is that God is still powerful. The truth is that he is still in control. And we don't have to be cast down in that way. We're going to go through it at some point, but we don't have to remain there. We don't have to take up permanent residence in the pit, because that's not our home. Our home is in heaven with God. And we ought to live like that's our home. So, verse 6 says, O my God, my soul is cast down within me. Therefore will I remember thee from the land of Jordan and of the Hermonites, from the hill Mizar. Deep calleth unto deep at the noise of thy waterspouts. All thy waves and thy billows are gone over me. And they're addressing God here and saying, God, we're just beaten down. We're covered up. We're at our wits' end. And that's what we ought to do when we get into those times. Instead of whining to ourselves, woe is me, you say, God, I don't know what to do. Help me, Lord. You call out to him. You talk to him. He should be the one you unload your problems to and your burdens. It says in verse 8, Yet the Lord will command his loving kindness in the daytime, and in the night his song shall be with me, and my prayer unto the God of my life. So, we see the feeling of, we see the so far the psalm starts with thirsting for God, with feeling like that we don't have enough of God in our life. That we just can't get enough of him, that it feels like he's absent. And then it goes from that to not being able to sustain and having a, just complete, utter breakdown in emotion, in physicality, in mentality, and just the soul being poured out within ourselves. That it feels like our insides are actually liquefying, that we're just not whole, we're not solid, we're not composed. And then remembering that God is there, calling out to him, letting him know our problems in verse 8, yet the Lord will command his loving kindness in the daytime, and in the night his song shall be with me, and my prayer unto the God of my life. I will say unto God my rock, why hast thou forgotten me? Why go I mourning? Because of the oppression of the enemy. And again, this is something that the sons of Korah can definitely, they wrote it, they can definitely relate to it. Because again, they would be ostracized within the nation. Similar to, not gonna go too far ahead and spoil too much about what Ron's been studying and what we've been studying along with him in the book of Judges. But there's a civil war coming up where every nation goes to war against the Benjamites. And guess who becomes ostracized for a time? The Benjamites. They go through a period in time where this great evil that's been done in their land, it almost becomes symbolic of the Benjamites for a period of history. And that's how the rest of Israel recognizes that tribe. Well, they're the tribe that tried to take a man from another man's home and were instead satisfied with this woman that didn't belong to them. And that's how they're identified. It becomes tied to their very tribal identity with the rest of the people for a period of time. But the sons of Korah, that really never left them. After the rebellion in the book of Numbers, after the earth opened up itself and God had them swallowed up in the very land itself, and it closed on them, that's something they never lived down. And you see that again and again and again. The Levites take this a different direction. Whenever Moses and Aaron had their squabble about the golden calf. Moses came back down from the mountain, learning from God, getting all this wisdom, all this knowledge, all these things he needed to know to lead the people. He comes back down, the people are already in pagan worship. They're already in apostasy. Before he ever even makes it back down the mountain, it's already turned the completely opposite 180-degree direction. And so what ends up happening, we're not going to go back and read and go through the whole story, because obviously Moses goes back up the mountain and receives the 10 Commandments again, because he broke the first 2 tables of stone. And I will refrain from telling one of the corniest jokes that I've ever heard in my life about why Moses was the most evil man in all of the Bible, and how it was because he broke all 10 Commandments at once. I won't tell that joke. But he comes back down, and they have this problem because the people, they'd been at play. And so not only were they worshiping these golden calves and worshiping these things, but they were also worshiping in pagan ways. They were following these pagan rituals. And those pagan rituals included things like taking off your clothes in public and doing things in public that shouldn't be done in public. Things that should be done in private, in your marriage bed, things of that nature. And the people were engaged in those kind of things publicly. And that's not God's plan. Not only not for his people, but for anybody. regardless of whether we're living, in the Old Testament under the law. It's not within his principles. It's not within his morals that he's laid and written in the hearts of men. It's not something we should be doing. But that's what they were doing. And there were punishments that were handed out. They had to drink water with that gold that was melted down into it. But not only that, we see the way that the Levites were chosen to be the priestly class, to be the butchers of the society. Because ultimately, that's what the Levites were. They were skilled in accepting the sacrifices and making the sacrifices. The people didn't bring their bullocks and rams and lambs already prepared. Here, I've got it prepared. It's already been cut for you. Here you go. They would bring the whole animal. And the Levite's job was to be a butcher. In the same way, you go to any butcher shop and anywhere in the country, they know exactly where to cut the sinews. They know exactly how to dress and prepare things. That's what they do. That's their profession. And the Levites were professionals. They became professional butchers of sacrifices by first becoming professional butchers of men. And they were tasked with going around and God commanded through Moses that they go down and they slaughter the people that were involved in this nonsense, in this pagan worship, in these activities. God's people broke God's laws, and they're going to deal with God's punishment. And so you see, there's all that never left the Levites. That's something that was on them for the rest. They became the butchers. And the way that happened was Moses asked, essentially, does anybody here stand with God? Does anybody here stand with God? Or is everybody completely just decided they're going to go the way of the devil, going to go the way of these false gods? There were some Levite men who stood up and said, no, we're on God's side. They were told, prove it. And they proved it in a very bloody way. Their own family members, I would say, their own neighbors, their own kinsmen, their own friends, they had to put to the blade. And so they ended up taking that on and becoming that for generations and generations and generations. And so that's something that isn't unique specifically to the sons of Korah, that they have this event that completely controls their future in the nation of Israel. It's something that's common. And stuff like that we still have today. I mean, there's still things where there's events that kind of define different people in society. It's just kind of hard to recognize whenever it's in our own lifetime. And we can't see things over the past, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 years in the same scale that you can look back and see things that happen over a few 100-year period. It's harder for us to measure those things. But one of the best examples I can think of in our country is those who were descended from slaves. And I don't mean people that I don't just mean African Americans or black people or whatever name you have that you want to say. I don't just mean that. I mean specifically those who descended from slavery. Those who descended from slavery have a bit of a different starting point than people who didn't descend from slavery. Their families had fewer generations to build wealth and to purchase property. They had fewer history in this country than others that didn't. They're more along the same lines of those that immigrated here more recently, because they didn't have the same rights and abilities to own property and build wealth that others did up until the mid 1800s. So there were people that had a 100, 200 year head start in being able to build wealth. And so you see that they suffer certain problems. And I'm not going to teach a sociology class or a history class this morning. We don't have time for any of that, and I'm not qualified to do either. And you'd find that I disagree with almost all the sociology that's taught in the country today anyway, because it's a bunch of nonsense. But, slavery isn't the only component that makes up, or being an ancestor of a slave. There's all kinds of different things to go into that. And I'm not saying that, well, if you're a descendant of a slave, then there's no point in even trying. It's not what I'm saying at all. There is opportunity in this country for many people, and I'm also not going to stand up here and make a campaign speech for anybody either. But this country does have plenty of opportunity for those that are willing to work hard and apply themselves, those that are willing to learn and better themselves, those that are willing to gain and improve their skill set. So, only making a point in that you have a group that, I guess it'd be over the past 160 years has had a very different experience, has had a very different historical understanding and historical placement of themselves in this nation than other people. And so it's not unique to the Old Testament that you see that there are groups of people that just have different, almost different worldviews or different experiences than other groups or the majority of the group. You have majority groups, you have minority groups. That's been every country, everywhere, throughout, almost every country, almost everywhere, throughout all the time. I'm sure you could probably go somewhere like Sweden or Norway, and everybody there is either Sweden or Norwegian, and they're all pretty similar. But we'll not deal with that this morning. But that's what these sons of Korah have been dealing with. They have a completely different experience than the rest of the nation. They have a completely different outlook than the rest of the nation. They've been shaped differently. They think differently because of their environment, because of the differences that they've experienced in their life. So this puts them in a good place to relate to the people of the remnant in the future, the people who will be outcast, the people who will be suffering, the people who will be remaining on God's side. It will be very difficult for them at that time. It says in verse 10, "As with a sword in my bones mine enemies reproach me, while they say daily unto me, Where is thy God?" And so again, that reminder, the tears, back in verse 3, the tears say unto me, Where is thy God? Then you see, this, as with a sword in my bones, mine enemies reproach me, while they say daily unto me, Where is thy God? So that question about where is God? Is he here? Is he with me? Is he helping me? Is he faithful to me? Can I trust in him? Is he reliable? Is he true? Is he just? All those questions that swell in the mind of someone who feels like they've been forsaken. And it's coming from multiple sources. It's coming both from within and it's coming from outside. You got pressure from both directions there, from the inside and from the outside. It says in verse 11, "Why art thou cast down, O my soul? And why art thou disquieted within me?" That's the same two questions that were asked in verse 5. "Hope thou in God, for I shall yet praise him, who is the health of my countenance and my God." And so even in the midst of all of that, even in the midst of all the questioning, all of the doubt, all of the suffering, all of the pain, the anguish, the abandonment feeling, the aloneness feeling, there's a remembrance that even in the middle of all of that, well, I'm alive, I'm here. Without God, I wouldn't be here. Without God, I would be gone. Without God, I wouldn't exist. Without God, I wouldn't have the breath in my in my lungs. He is the health of my countenance. He sustains us. And so even though they were lacking sustenance, even though their tears were their meat, even though they had nothing else but to cry and to weep, God is still sustaining. God is still there. Even whenever it feels like we have nothing, even whenever it feels like we're alone, even whenever it feels like we're in the most difficult situation, in the deepest, darkest pit, He is there. We just need to talk to Him. We need to search after Him. So, that is Psalm 42. Are there any comments or questions on that one this morning?